A Russian drone strike on the city of Kharkiv has left multiple casualties and widespread destruction, striking residential areas at a moment when international delegations are gathered in Geneva to discuss a proposal aimed at ending nearly 4 years of war in Ukraine. According to the mayor of Kharkiv, 4 people have been killed and 17 others have been wounded. The attack underscores the continuing intensity of Russian operations across eastern Ukraine, even as diplomatic efforts continue in Europe. In the aftermath of the strike, smoke rose from damaged neighbourhoods on the outskirts of Kharkiv. Local authorities and emergency teams moved through burned houses, collapsed roofs and destroyed vehicles as they searched for survivors and assessed the scale of the damage. Rescue workers carried bodies from the site, loaded victims into emergency vehicles and continued to investigate whether civilians remained under the debris. Residents described the strike as sudden and violent. Many were at home preparing for the night when the blast wave shattered windows and caused structural damage. In one affected neighbourhood, houses were burned out completely, with walls partially collapsed and roofs caved in. Cars parked along the street were reduced to charred shells after being hit by flying debris and fire. One resident, Olena Bondarenko, described the fear inside her home as the strike hit the area. Speaking in Russian, she explained the initial impact on her family. She said, "The windows are broken. There are 2 small children in the house. 1 window is broken and 2 others are cracked. The small children are very frightened." Her account echoed the experiences of many families in the district who reported similar shock from the force of the explosions. According to Bondarenko, the disruption began moments after air raid sirens sounded. She described how the first detonation startled her family and how the second blast caused significant destruction inside the home. She said, "We were just about to go to bed when the sirens started wailing. The first bang wasn't very loud, but it scared us, and then the next one blew out the windows. It was a nightmare." Bondarenko added that residents remain exhausted by the repeated strikes on civilian neighbourhoods, hoping that political discussions underway abroad will lead to a reduction in violence. She said, "We want peace and we want all this to end quickly so that we can live in peace and our children don't have to see this." Local authorities later confirmed that the attack involved Iranian-designed Shahed strike drones, which have been repeatedly used by Russian forces throughout the war. These drones typically target infrastructure, housing blocks and industrial zones, often arriving in groups to overwhelm Ukrainian air defences. In this case, officials reported as many as 16 impacts across several districts of the city. Oleg Sinyhubov, head of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration, provided early details on the extent of the attack. He stated another massive strike on the city of Kharkiv, presumably by Shaheds. Currently, there are reports of 16 strikes in various locations, at least 3 districts of Kharkiv. As a result of the strikes on private households, houses have been destroyed or damaged. 2 people, a woman and a man, have been killed, and 8 people have been injured, including a girl. He noted that these figures were based on initial assessments and added that the casualty numbers were later updated by the mayor. Sinyhubov also highlighted the priorities for rescue teams as they continued operations at the scene. He said the main thing now is to make sure that there are no people under the rubble and to identify those who need medical assistance. Emergency personnel worked through smoke and scattered debris while structural instability, fires and unexploded fragments posed significant risks. Firefighters extinguished burning homes and vehicles as police officers cordoned off sections of the neighbourhood to prevent civilian access. Medical teams evaluated survivors, transported the injured to hospitals and supported those suffering shock from the blast. The attack comes during a sensitive diplomatic moment. United States, Ukrainian and European officials are currently meeting in Geneva to consider a peace proposal intended to de-escalate the conflict. The talks are part of broader efforts to assess conditions under which hostilities might be reduced, security arrangements might be stabilised, and occupied regions might be addressed through negotiation. Despite these discussions, this latest strike in Kharkiv demonstrates that the situation on the ground remains highly volatile. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began nearly 4 years ago, and cities such as Kharkiv have repeatedly been targets of missile strikes, drone attacks and artillery fire. While frontline zones remain the most heavily affected, major population centres continue to experience long-range attacks aimed at energy infrastructure, residential areas and public facilities. The frequency of these operations increases during periods of heightened military activity or when Russian forces attempt to apply pressure during diplomatic negotiations. In this incident, several individual residential homes were destroyed or severely damaged. Entire sections of roofing collapsed onto living rooms and bedrooms, shattered glass covered floors, and fire damage spread across wooden structures, leaving blackened beams and collapsed walls. Residents began clearing debris even as investigators worked to document the impact sites. Local authorities coordinated with national emergency services to conduct structural evaluations. Engineers inspected surviving buildings to determine which houses remained safe to enter and which required immediate evacuation. Several affected families were temporarily relocated to nearby shelters, while city officials organised assessments of longer-term housing needs. The strike also caused disruptions to local utilities. Gas lines damaged in the blast required emergency shutdowns in parts of the neighbourhood. Water supply was interrupted in areas where pipes ruptured from the impact, and power outages were reported in several blocks due to damage to distribution lines. Repair crews were deployed once safety teams confirmed that there were no unexploded devices in the vicinity. Hospitals in Kharkiv received the injured victims, treating them for blast wounds, shrapnel injuries and trauma from collapsing structures. Medical staff worked under continued alert due to the possibility of additional strikes, a recurring challenge for healthcare facilities across Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Despite the ongoing threat, residents remained near their homes to gather essential belongings and attempt to salvage remaining property. Many stood beside burned cars and collapsed fences while emergency teams continued operations. The sense of urgency among responders reflected the fear that additional waves of drones could arrive before the area was fully secured. Authorities emphasised that the strike demonstrated the continued need for air defence reinforcement across northeastern Ukraine. Kharkiv, located near the Russian border, remains one of the cities most regularly targeted by drone and missile attacks. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly appealed to international partners for additional air defence systems capable of intercepting low-flying drones such as the Shahed-type models used in this attack. As diplomatic discussions continue in Geneva, Ukrainian representatives have argued that civilian protection remains a central condition for any meaningful progress in peace negotiations. The timing of the strike, occurring as officials deliberate potential frameworks for reducing hostilities, adds pressure on negotiators to address the reality of ongoing violence across urban areas. The peace proposal under discussion seeks to outline steps for reducing active fighting, addressing territorial disputes and expanding humanitarian access. While details of the proposal remain under negotiation, Ukrainian and European officials have emphasised that attacks on civilians undermine the stability required for any progress toward a long-term settlement. In Kharkiv, municipal authorities continue cataloguing the full extent of damage from the latest strike. Insurance assessments, reconstruction planning and social assistance coordination are underway for families whose homes are no longer inhabitable. Many residents face the challenge of repairing homes during winter when temperatures drop and heating needs increase. The city has repeatedly mobilised emergency funds for rebuilding efforts, but continued attacks strain local resources. Law enforcement agencies are conducting forensic analysis of the drone fragments recovered at the site. These examinations help determine the specific model used and identify patterns in the attack's trajectory. Such information supports both military defence planning and international monitoring of weapons supply chains. The attack also adds to the broader documentation compiled by Ukrainian prosecutors and international investigators examining the conduct of military operations against civilian areas. Records from incidents like this one are added to case files that track patterns of strikes affecting non-military infrastructure. Despite the destruction, residents in the affected neighbourhood continue working with emergency teams to restore semblances of normality. Volunteers distributed water, blankets and food as families secured personal documents and essential items. Utility workers prepared temporary lines to restore basic services where possible. Emergency shelters across the city remain active, offering temporary accommodation while structural inspections continue. Social services are coordinating psychological support for families traumatized by the attack, particularly households with children who were present during the explosions. Throughout the day, officials issued public advisories urging residents to monitor air raid alerts and take shelter when warnings are issued. While air defense teams intercepted some drones approaching the region, the number of devices involved in this attack allowed several to reach residential zones. The city's mayor reiterated that reconstruction efforts would begin immediately, but emphasized that ongoing attacks complicate long-term planning. Authorities must continually redirect resources from rebuilding programs to emergency response, leaving several previously damaged neighborhoods still under repair. As the situation in Kharkiv develops, the link between military escalation and diplomatic negotiations remains under close attention. The incident underscores the challenges facing mediators in Geneva, who are working to outline a pathway toward reducing violence, while civilian areas across Ukraine remain vulnerable to repeated strikes. This latest attack demonstrates the continued risks faced by residents in frontline and near frontline regions. Even as peace discussions progress abroad, the humanitarian impact of the war continues to unfold on the ground. In Kharkiv, rescue workers remain on site to complete final checks under the rubble, secure damaged structures and ensure that all victims have been accounted for. Investigations into the attack will continue, and local authorities will update casualty figures as assessments progress. At this stage, the situation in Kharkiv reflects the dual reality of ongoing diplomatic engagement and sustained military pressure. Civilian areas remain exposed, rescue teams continue operations, and international negotiations proceed as Ukraine faces new waves of strikes. The incident leaves Kharkiv counting its losses once again, with emergency crews completing search operations, hospitals treating the wounded, and officials documenting the consequences of the latest attack. As the city moves into recovery mode, international attention remains focused on the Geneva discussions and whether diplomatic efforts can reduce the violence that continues to impact communities across Ukraine. The situation remains tense, with rescue operations completed at the site and authorities continuing to assess the full impact of the strike on Kharkiv.